What you're about to listen to are 3 lessons I had to fully embrace to complete this painting of Yor. But before we start, I just wanted to mention that I completed about 60% of it on my iPad alone, using Procreate as my main digital painting software of choice. Not only did I start it in Procreate, but over the 7 to 8 different canvases that I used, it's reporting that I spent over 40 of the 60 to 70 total hours in Procreate. As a matter of fact, I did all of the final touches in Procreate as well during the last 2 hours. I'm mentioning this because I'm working on a huge Procreate course to take you from absolute beginner to making art on the iPad to understanding everything about how I work with Procreate to make artwork just like this one. We're talking from the iPad settings to physical accessories to how to make the most of Procreate itself. We'll be using examples just as complex as these, with up to 50 layers and all of the details for the features that I use most. Now, this course isn't complete yet, but if you are interested in getting notified when it drops later this year, please feel free to sign up to my newsletter. The link is in the description box below. But don't worry, I'm not going to spam you with random stuff every day. You'll only receive relevant information about this course only, and you'll be the first to know exactly when it launches. More details about the course will be coming out later in the coming weeks. Thank you. Let's begin. Lesson 1. Abandoning fear and embracing confidence. The biggest reason for my success with this piece was promising myself to pick the absolute coolest idea I could possibly think of to paint with no regards to my skill level whatsoever. Just pure inspiration and creativity. I had started with several ideas sketched out on different compositions, but I couldn't decide on which one to go with. So I took a break to rest my eyes on the couch to imagine Yor Forger in her element, the deadly but beautiful Thorn Princess, an assassin, slowly hunting down her prey and eliminating them in an instant. It came to me in that moment that a low-angle view of her crawling on the floor with a pin in her hand ready to lunge forth to pierce the next villain's throat was perfect. But it didn't end there, because as I posed to take my own reference photos and started sketching, more and more ideas would come to me. If they seemed epic enough, I remembered the promise I made to myself and jumped for it. I'd be doing a disservice to my future self if I limited what I explored now with my current skill level. Fear of failure will rob you of your creative potential. We all have to deal with it, but try to let it go. Then look at what's left behind. Look at what the fear was hiding from you. So I thought to myself, what if she was crouching on a huge table instead? Then I could use some cool K-pop music videos as the background. I was actually having lots of trouble finding good reference for someone from the same angle that I took the reference photos from, so this saved me lots of time. But what if she was also surrounded by sinister corporate suits that were hatching their next devious plan at a dinner table? What if she just finished dealing with them and the viewer was next? No matter how crazy or difficult the idea was, as long as I liked it and I felt that it would go well with my own style and aesthetic, I took it on. And I think you should too. Lesson 2. Abandoning ego. The entire time I worked, I had an unwavering focus on the final result above all else in importance. It's the only thing that matters to your regular viewer anyway, not that there's anything wrong with that. Eventually, I realized that I needed to request critique from my friends and accept feedback from my audience to make the biggest jump towards that end. One of them helped me tremendously in the beginning, suggesting a different pose for the hands and feet to help sell the image. They also commented on the overall crop of the shot itself, and that made it into the final piece. She even went out of her way to take some reference photos for me, which were very helpful. Later on, while I was streaming on Twitch, a brilliant individual presented to me the entire idea for Yor putting her foot down on that lucky goon on the table on the right. Several more hours in, I had to swallow my pride after a stream after I got annoyed at all the people in chat vaguely saying that things looked a little off, and later that night I realized that I had to completely change her right arm because it literally looked bent out of shape. It was something that went unnoticed by everyone during the sketch phase, but became glaringly problematic the more I rendered the lighting and color. Although chat wasn't clear on what the issue was, they could tell something was off, and I'm glad that I eventually noticed and made the change. This is even though it cost me quite a few hours at that point. Finally, near the end, I asked another friend that I knew had an even better vision for it than I did for what it could be. I knew they had a good eye for the impact that I was going for, so I asked them to do a paint over, and that paint over carried me to the finish line. I was no longer stuck with how I wanted to proceed with the lighting and colors. Taking several steps back though, I realized I had gotten much better at eliminating unnecessary preconceptions and mental blocks towards what I could do and how things should be done. Who says you have to draw and paint everything in the background yourself? I spent 3 hours in Cyberpunk 2077. I went to every new apartment added into the game and carefully selected the best shot to put Yor in. I tweaked the depth of field, focal length, and lighting to match it perfectly. And then I did an extremely complicated juggle of using Pure Ref to layer the line art of Yor over the entire video game window on my PC. That was the only way I could properly guess the correct perspective to set the camera in. But also, who says that you have to be super fast and efficient in order to grow? I easily spent 20 hours before I got to shading anything, and it was all worth it in the end. Who also says you can't ever paint in color well if you start your piece in grayscale? I did half of this painting in color and the other half in grayscale, basically at the same time. But once again, everything worked out fine in the end. I used what skills I had developed best to get the right values I wanted, and then I put my best effort into the colors later. I used as many filters and blending modes as I felt needed. Sometimes, I also had to let go of what I found to be the most artsy and fulfilling thing and focus on learning about what people care about most in a painting. Sure, it can feel shameful and defeating to care what other people think, right? But I also remember that sometimes the greatest achievements simply don't belong to the achiever. Once you've aligned yourself with a clear goal, you get into a special flow and you're just present for the magic that happens. And you'd be surprised at how well people can pick up on that in any genre, in any art form. There are so many parts that I wish I could do better. Some parts of the shading of her arms are a little weird, and the reflection in the glass could easily be more realistic, and there could be a lot more detail in the props. But regardless of all of these shortcomings, I still chose to allocate the majority of my time in the end on Yor's face and her key elements. It's a priority that people identify her hair and her golden accents to recognize her character. The special effects come at the end, but they make a huge statement towards the mood and initial impact of the piece. Finally, we move on to lesson 3, pursuing perfection. Throughout the painting, I would not tolerate mediocrity. If I knew I could do something better, that I had done it better before, I would get it done. I'd redraw or repaint something if necessary. The whole time I was constantly thinking of everything I admired from other artists. What little things would they add to the work? How would they show personality and character better? What do people say most often about their work? And what's the first impact that I get when I see their work? So I added blood splatter to the characters and the props, wear and tear, atmospheric fog, dust, dirt, grime, sweat, broken glass, etc. to make it all as interesting as possible. Eventually, everything starts to sing in harmony. I tried my best to work as linearly as possible, so that I would naturally limit detail only to where I decided it fit best. Usually, what I end up doing is working on things in different layers while I hide the other layers, and that does not promote a cohesive, magical result with the painting. If you're wondering which specific artists that inspired me for the most of this process, they include Guyez, Mogun, and Ask. I also noticed that giving my best effort to the first attempt at something can save more time than I thought it would otherwise. Sometimes being hesitant and planning to fail only brings more frustration in the end. Every now and then I duplicate the canvas and merge things to simplify everything before I moved on. This greatly reduced my stress and anxiety and gave me some limits that could influence my creativity. When I lost motivation, I would take a step back and ask myself what I needed to do to get me excited again to actually have the energy to complete the piece. Often, the spirit is willing, but the flesh gets tired and bored very easily. Usually, what happened is that I would pull off course due to some sort of distraction and let yours face, for example, deviate from my intention. My favorite thing to draw is faces. It's also my favorite thing to paint, and so if the face isn't on point, I quickly lose interest. But it can also be that it was never something that you were ever truly proud of in the first place. So maybe you need to add another variable to take it to the next level. This was also the case near the end when I let go of the idea of making two separate variations, a clean and a bloody version of your. There's only one version of this painting now. It's the dark and bloody, yet beautiful and alluring Thorn Princess, your forger. This has been Ergo Josh, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.